Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the great Mies van der Rohe. I'm also adjunct faculty at Columbia College Chicago in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all my students. Today we're going back to the basics with Rhino. This video is part of a series where we look at the basics. And today we're looking at extrude. Now, let's talk a little bit about what an extrusion is. If I do a Google search of architecture, and this is actually one of the first times I've ever just typed in the word architecture, and I was surprised at what I saw. I thought I would see a lot more buildings that you could make from a simple extrusion. This is certainly a building and many more buildings that I could make from just the extrusion, but it's interesting to see I guess not only recent buildings, because there's some brutalist buildings that some parts of it would be a little bit more challenging to make from extrusions, but a lot of architecture that you see and you walk around and you look, you can make a lot of it with just knowing how to extrude. But we're starting to see a lot more complex forms that really push us and make us learn more than just the extrusion command. And we'll get to those. In the next video, we're going to talk about loft and sweep. But today's all about extrusions. Alright, so before we jump in to the tutorial, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe. Click on subscribe, click on the bell, and click on all to receive all the notifications. There's a lot of content here. There's content for everyone. Not only Rhino and Grasshopper, but V-Ray, Revit, lots of content here. So go ahead and subscribe. And also connect with me on Instagram at my first name Alfonso _ my last name Peluso. Alright, let's jump back into the tutorial. Okay, so here you see some of what we're going to cover in today's tutorial, and we have our outline here. We're going to look at making closed shapes. That's the first thing that you really need to know and know how to check and know how to make. If you're looking to make extrusions, the shapes need to be closed. It's not often that I use a double exclamation mark, but I did there for closed shape. We'll look at that. We'll look at join. We'll look at the command what. And a bunch of other things. So I'll use this as a guideline to make sure that I cover all of these topics. Alright, let's get started. So I'm going to make a new file here. And we're just going to talk a little bit about scale, but we're just going to work in small objects inches. My students at Columbia College are working at a print size of 4 inches by 10 inches. So 4 by 10 is kind of a unique size to work in. And I just want to talk a little bit about the pitfalls when you move from 2D to 3D. So they're working two-dimensionally with this 4 by 10 sheet. So if I go to DOC, if I type in DOC enter, and I go to grid, I'm going to set my grid line count. So I keep mentioning 4 by 10. So 10 because I'm going to make each one of these grid lines 1 inch, and then I'll look at a major grid line every 5 inches, and I'll set my snap spacing to 1. So 10, 1, 5, and 1. Okay. Alright, and I mentioned they've been working with a sheet. Now this sheet becomes irrelevant three-dimensionally, but when they were working two-dimensionally it was important. So had this sheet that is, turn my grid snap, use the grids here. So that's each one of these grid lines is 1 inch, and then this is every 5 inches. So here's the 2. So that's the 10 inches. There would be 5. It's 1 short, so 4. So 10 by 4. Alright, so I'll use this to start with. Okay, something else that's really important, I think, when you're creating your 3D models is your layer structure and how you set that up. And that can be based on building geometry, that could be based on Rhino geometry, and today I'm going to look at specifically using this layer setup and how it relates to Rhino geometry. So everything that you draw two-dimensionally is actually a curve in Rhino. So I'm using the abbreviation CRV for my curves. Eventually I'll have surfaces, but I'm going to start with curves, so I'll make that current. And I'm going to turn my grid snap off here, and I'm just going to make a rectangle. Alright, actually, let's put that back on. Alright, so there's my rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and extrude that. Today's all about extrude. Okay, so for my extrusions, I'm going to put those on the layer surface. So I'm abbreviating that SRF. I don't have to make it current. In fact, I'm going to keep curve current, and we'll talk about how to change the geometry to the surface layer. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to type in Extrude Crv as the command. I'm going to extrude it some height. Okay, so I'm going to take that surface now, that extrusion, and I'm going to right click and put it on the surface layer. Okay, alright, so we have that here. Alright, so that's pretty much, all you need to make an extrusion, but there's different shapes. Like that was a rectangle. Okay, so if I turn off that surface layer for a moment and I look at the curve that we extruded, if I select it and I type in the command what, that's the command what, it's actually a command in Rhino. It gives us a lot of information, but what I'm looking for here is I'm looking to see that this is a closed polyline. Okay, so that's very important for when you're extruding. Something else that I missed when we extruded was making sure that it was capped. So let's take a look at that. So if I was to just use a polyline command and I drew a series of lines and I want to make sure that it closes, so I could click on close from the command line or just make sure I snap to my first point. And then if I select that polyline and type in the command what, I want to see that I have a closed polyline. Okay, so that's important, it's closed. Now when I extrude it, extrude this curve, I'm making sure that solid is set to yes. Okay, so default is no, solid equal no. So click on your solid equal no, it'll change to solid equal yes. And that will give you a cap on the top of it. So to see that cap, let's change this viewport. I'm going to change this viewport to, let's look at a pen view. Okay, so turn my surface back on. I'm going to put this on the surface layer. Okay, so let's keep an eye on our outline for today. Okay, so we've talked about having a closed shape. We've looked at the what command. We've looked at extrude curve. We're starting to look at display types. So we're seeing that this is the display type now that we've set to pen. Okay, something that we haven't talked about is the join command. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and change. If I'm drawing, I like to always go back to wireframe. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw some lines. So I'll draw this line, and I'll draw this line, and I'll draw this line. Okay. So I drew 3 separate lines to make this triangle. What I'm going to go ahead and do is it's not a closed polyline, right? It's just 3 separate lines. So, but they do meet. I did use my end snaps. Okay, it's not magic. I have to snap to the ends to be able to join the lines together. So if I select these, and I type in the command join, you'll see here 3 curves joined into one closed curve. And if I use my command what, I'm going to see it's a closed polyline. Perfect, great. Now I can extrude it. Okay, so extruding that. I'm going to put that one also on the surface layer. Alright, so starting to talk about display types. So a couple that I think are good for line drawings. One would be pen. Let's talk about what we see here. So pen it's a hidden line, and what I mean by that is if we look at wireframe, we see all the lines. Okay, so we're seeing through the object. But a hidden line view, which is our pen view, doesn't show us those hidden lines. Okay, so we're just seeing the form, which is a nice way to look at it. Okay, so another thing that I can do is I can set up what's called a print display. So if I type in the command print display, I'm going to set this to on. Now there'll be a link at the end of this video to print display so that you can learn all about print display, but it allows you to, what you see is what you get. So we'll look at that in a second. So I'm going to turn this on. Okay, so my print display is on. So now what I want to do is I want to set all my print colors to black. Okay, so I'm just going to do that. Alright. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this right now. So in this pen view, what I like about it is it's making the outline of the objects heavy. And as I rotate, it's changing the orientation of those heavy objects, which is nice. So it's not view dependent, it's view independent. I can rotate this around and get those heavy lines where I need them. Okay, so now let's switch this to technical. So with technical, we get hidden lines. And those hidden lines, we see the hidden lines, are dashed in this technical mode, which I like also. Let's see something here. Okay, so I'm just turning off that sheet because it wasn't showing me the sheet as a hidden line, as a technical line. So you got to be careful with that. Like what, look really closely at how Rhino is displaying this. And again, this is not dependent on the view. I can rotate this around, and in real time, it automatically adjusts those hidden lines and makes them technical. Okay, so I'm going to change this back to pen for a moment. Alright, let's take a look back at our outline here. So we've looked at closed shape, join, what, extrude curve. Started to look at display types, just mainly looking at pen and technical. Okay, CPlane. CPlane is always important. I feel like every tutorial that I do, I could talk a little bit about CPlane. So let's talk about this. So our CPlane is short for construction plane. Essentially, it's the plane that we're going to draw on. So I want to make a hole in this box object, and to do that, I want to create an extrusion that was not or is not in the XY plane, not a flat extrusion, but an extrusion on the side of this object. Okay, so this allows you to orientate your extrusion objects differently. Okay, let's look closer at that. So I'm going to change this back to wireframe, and I'm going to type in the command CPlane. Okay, now I like 3-point. I like to use a 3-point. Surface is also one that's pretty good. but 3-point is, I think, the best one. So I'm going to click on 3-point because this asks me for an origin. I'm going to pick the lower left-hand corner of that box, and then the direction for the X, which I'm going to pick this lower right-hand corner. Okay, now it's also, before I do that, it wants to know if I have a vertical z-axis. But before we get too far ahead, let's click that lower right for the X. Okay, and then the CPlane orientation. Alright, so it was that top left corner there. So it was origin, X, and then its orientation, where I picked that top left, which essentially set the Y direction. So let's do it one more time. Okay, so let's set my CPlane back to world top. That's the default. Type in CPlane again. Click on 3-point. So lower left hand corner, lower right hand corner, and upper left hand corner. Okay, so now you see that drawing plane is on the front of that cube. Okay, so we're going to make a circle on the front of that cube. Get it a little bit. Let's center it. How about that? Okay. Alright, so there we have that. And I'm going to go ahead and extrude it. Now my extrusions, I like when they go all the way through. Okay, so if I was to look at this in a shaded view, you'd see that it goes all the way through the object. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this off to the side. Okay, put this on my surface layer. Okay. Just looking at, want to scale this, looking at some of the scale features. Okay, I was looking for let's go to the top view. There we go. So I was looking for scale in the other direction. So that's called the gumball. So at the bottom of my screen, you see I have gumball turned on. So I'm getting used to using the gumball and liking things that I can do with the gumball. Okay, make this bigger. Yeah, if I hold my shift key, it scales it proportionally. Okay, so it's a little distorted. Alright, awesome. Okay, so I want to subtract this purple object from the blue object. So I'm going to use Boolean difference, select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract from. So that's the blue object I'm subtracting from. Enter. Select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract with. That's the purple. Alright, let's go back to our pen. Alright, so I want to look a little more closely at this. So let's see, that's the original curve. I'm just going to delete that. Okay, so I see that it has an issue. Okay, I like this pen mode, and I imagine it's just going to keep getting better. It has an issue with showing me the bottom edge of this object as a heavy line weight. It shows me the complete outline here, but it's having trouble with that. So let's just address it. So I had showed print display that print display is on, state is equal to on. So I'm going to make this layer 4. I'm going to call this heavy. That's my heavy lines. And I'm going to make that current. And the print width right now is default. So I need to give that a size. I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to guess around 0.6 millimeters to match this other one. So I may need to adjust that. So 0.6. Okay. So I want this edge to be 0.6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the command dupe. I could use dupe border or I could use dupe edge. Okay, in this case. So let's try dupe border and later we'll do dupe edge. So dupe border. That picks the whole border of the object. Okay, so in this case I wanted dupe edge. So dupe edge. Okay, so that's that whole circle. It's not just that lower right, it's the entire circle. Okay. Alright, so that went on the heavy layer. So now I'm getting that edge to be heavy. So there's always, when making beautiful line drawings, there's always getting in there and working on them, and the computer can only do so much for you. Alright, so we have this. Let's look at this in technical. We have this in technical. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. You can get some good views of this. Some of these down low views are good. Alright, let's get back to our outline. Okay, so we've looked at Boolean difference. So we need to talk about transform. We've talked about line weights a little bit, and then ultimately printing this to a PDF. We're going to have to use a raster output if we're going to do something like technical. Alright, so let me turn the sheet back on. Alright, so again, this sheet, so these two-dimensional lines are not showing up as hidden lines. So it's important that you turn off your two-dimensional lines. So I'm going to turn off sheet, and also here, these lines that are going in the back, those should also be shown as a technical line, as a hidden line. So those are the ones that are on the curve layer. Okay, so I see that happening here. So very important that you turn off your layers that have two-dimensional lines on them. Okay. Alright, but it works very well for three-dimensional objects. So I'm only seeing three-dimensional objects at the moment. Okay, and then once you have your view set, your view that you're going to stick with, relatively close to it, which you can tell I haven't decided on one yet. But once you have that picked, then if you need to add some heavy lines in, like we did with that circle edge, you could go ahead and do that. Snap to those objects. Okay, so turn the sheet layer back on. So what I've had students do is they've tried to fit all their objects into 4x10 into that little sheet, and then they've tried to print that in the perspective view. And that's not the way that you want to do this. We want to have our sheet layer off, and then you just want to fill the viewport with your objects. And you could do that a little bit in perspective, or you could go to a top view and you could copy these objects. I could copy, I'm not sure what this is looking like at the moment. I could select all those objects, and I could scale them. I can rotate those. So I could start to use this gumball. Just want to make sure that I select the window selection of the whole object. I can start to rotate some of these. Okay, so it's it's going to take some time to get this looking good. But the idea is that I start to fill up this area, and it's going to take a while to fill it up. Okay, so let's just add some more here. Let's go back to top. So this is this idea of creating a field, and then we fill the field up with our objects. And typically in a field, you don't want to have too much negative space or empty space. Okay, so you see it's going to take It's going to take some time to fill this entire field up. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. So now it's about how do we make this 4x10. Alright, so let's look at printing this on a 4x10 sheet. I'm just going to save this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and type in print. Okay, so I have a video that shows you how to set up. This is looking pretty good, by the way. I have a video that shows you how to make a custom sheet size. Okay, so you want to refer to that video. So at the end of this video, I'll have a link to print display and custom paper sizes. So I've already set up a custom paper size, which is 4x10. Now the default is vector output. So that's what you're going to see when you go to print yours. It won't be 4x10, but you'll see that it's not showing you the technical lines, or it's not showing you the print display correctly. So for that, in this case, because we want to include those technical lines, this has to be a raster output. Now I am curious if I close this and let's say I change this to pen. Okay, so let's look at that. That's pen, and let's go to print. Okay, let's change this to vector. Okay, so two-dimensional drawings we can print to vector and this will work, but once we are working with three-dimensional drawings, and I had thought that we needed some shade or shadow for this to be raster, but it looks like for these print displays to work correctly, if it's 3D, we need this to be raster. Okay, so let's go back to technical. Let's type in print. Okay, so you set your paper size. You set this to raster. You pick your window. Okay, so this window has already been picked for me, but when you pick your window, you want to click and hold and then make that window. Press enter. Okay. Close some of these as we go. All right, now when we set up the custom sheet in that video, I talked a lot about scale. Now in perspective view and a 3D view, that scale is irrelevant. There's no scale to fit. You can't pick a scale when you're in perspective. It is actually scaled to fit, even though it's grayed out. Okay, so not much to it. It's just picking the destination, which is the PDF, picking the paper size, setting it to raster output, picking the window to print, and that's it. Alright, let's take a look at this. Alright, so here's our print. So you see the line weight isn't as crisp as the vector. The technical drawings, they're a little bit blurry because it's made those raster. So just something to think about, something to keep in mind. Alright, so I think we covered everything. Let's just take a look. Yep, we've covered all of that. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to go to my YouTube channel and subscribe and connect with me on Instagram. Also, you'll see my face pop up and you can click on that, and that will allow you to subscribe to the channel, and then you're going to see two more links. One link to creating a custom PDF size and another to working with print display in Rhino. Alright, if you liked it, found this video helpful, go ahead and click on the like below and leave me a comment, and I'll see you on the next one.